The Roller Truck Grand Prix Series. For the third year in succession, Roller Truck sponsor the British Series, an opportunity for the British drivers who are working their way up to international stardom to try their hand against the seasoned professionals who race in the World Championship.
With the increasing popularity of inshore powerboat racing around the world, the beginning of the 1985 series looked a very questionable one from the point of view of a national championship. John Hill and Jonathan Jones had decided to commit themselves not only to the World Series but to American 2-litre racing as well. And so as we started here at Carmill for round one of the British Series, there were a lot of questions in people's minds.
This is Jim Peverall with a home product. And this, of course, is an area in which an embryo boat builder can bring a hull, try it against the international competition and see what other people are bringing about. And Peverall has been doing this for some time. During the course of the season, we will watch his progress. But here at Carmill, let's see what the conditions are like. Tony Williams.
Well, there's a lot of lift on this course. The boat actually is almost uncontrollable down the straight. I'm having to put a nose weight in so I can use full throttle because I have to trim in to compensate for the lift, and the boat just catching its nose and twitching and digging in. So it's quite hairy, and it's quite a difficult course to drive because it has a very, very sharp right-hander.
The views of ex-world champion Tony Williams. But what about Steve Curtin's?
Steve, I noticed this circuit's got a right-hand bend in it. Again, unusual for circuit powerboat racing and not dissimilar from South Africa, where you've just come from. What kind of problems does it cause for you as a powerboat driver, that type of corner?
Well, the boats are basically set up to turn left. That's your first problem. When you are turning right, apart from the sort of inherent problems you've got with the boat not wanting to do it, you're sort of into an unnatural situation where you're so used to slamming the boat in and getting thrown this way. You float round the right-hander, or you want to drop it in and turn it, but you're not sure what the reaction is going to be on the boat.
Well, certainly Steve Curtin's views have to be valid. And a man who's going to be listening to them is Bill Ormiston, who's trying his hand this year at both the International Series as well as the National Series in the Century Oil-sponsored craft. A retrospective view of what happened at this, the first event in the 1985 season, is one which brings to mind the fact that there were a great deal of mechanical problems. Among those who had them was Mark Wilson in Roller Truck's own entry.
Yes, Mark had just returned from South Africa and broke down out on the circuit when he went out to test with an engine firing on only 5 cylinders. An electrical fault appeared to be the problem. Most of Mark's spares were still on their way back from South Africa. A terrible start to the beginning of a series in which he was the prime sponsored boat.
So as the Osprey team brought him in, we looked down once again at Bill Ormiston's craft and posed the question to him that he too seemingly had had a problematical practice here. There seemed to be a great deal of concern about his engine too.
What happened to the engine when he went out to test?
We blew a head gasket, so the engine had just been rebuilt, and so it's always a bit fraught when you first put it in the water. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, and we were going out quietly to run both the gearbox and the engine in, and as I pulled away from the pits, there was it just wasn't running properly, and as I went round I saw everybody sort of gesticulating on the bank to me saying, cut the engine, drama.
Well, talking of drama, of course, there was one man who had already suffered a tremendous amount of drama by this stage in the year, Steve Curtin, the defending British champion in the national championships and had already run in the World Series. But Steve, how did you feel coming up to this beginning of this first heat?
Well, obviously it's the first heat of the first round of the championship, which I'm obviously out to defend, and it's very important to me that we actually get a good start. We're coming up to the start here. For us as drivers, it's very important that we actually get down to the first and second turn. In fact, I mean, the first and second, and get out clear of anybody else. Clear water gives you an extra sort of 10 mile an hour, so it's very important to be there. You can see coming up into this turn, you'll see as we approach it, the wind gets under me and Tony, and it's difficult. Coming into the second turn, I've just got the edge on him, close him off into the turn a little bit, and up he goes.
Yes, a difficult time for Tony, of course, valuable seconds lost. And after this particular heat, we asked Tony just how he felt about that incident.
Tony, first lap, first heat, side by side with Steve Curtin into turn 2, and suddenly you're on your side. What do you think happened?
Well, I had to take my foot off before the boy a bit earlier than Steve. His boat drops down quicker than mine does, and that extra foot was enough to just get in front, and of course I was 2 inches away from his transom and fell in the hole, and the boat just went up on its side.
That delay to Tony Williams meant that Steve Curtin went into a commanding lead. The fact that Mark Wilson non-started also helped here Curtin's quest for victory. Both he, Williams and Wilson had of course been racing in South Africa, where there are right-hand turns. As far as Bill Ormiston was concerned, however, this didn't exist. He didn't have the experience of them, so he was that much slower. Williams could not catch Curtin.
Steve, the first lap of the first heat was a bit traumatic at that second turn, boy. A close run between you and Tony. What do you think happened down there?
I think more traumatic for Tony than myself. We went in, we floated around this first turn together. Approaching the next turn, we were very, very close together. Neither of us, it was obvious we're going to back off. Tony dropped his boat down just before the turn, shot past turn, and I gather Tony's boat rode up on my rooster and almost went over. You know, racing's a hard game.
Well, Steve, that was your comment at the time, but in actual fact, do you ever find that your opinion as to what happened on the day changes once you've had time to think about it after the race?
Not really. I mean, you know, a racing situation is a racing situation. As I said then, racing is a hard game. We've got a situation here that neither of us are going to back off. My boat's just ridden up in the air there. We've actually collided. I'm not going to back off even with a hole in my boat. Tony's doing the same. In fact, you'll see Tony, he takes in water here, so I mean he has to slow down. But the fact is, I mean, you'll keep going so long as that boat's afloat. It is a dangerous game. And as I said before, the first turn is very, very important, so you'll risk pretty well anything to get to that first turn first.
Were you aware of how much damage you'd actually done to the boat itself at this stage?
No, I wasn't. In fact, it was about 3 laps after this, after Tony started to slow, in fact pulled out the race, that I was able to come into the middle of the circuit, talk to the Osprey, the rescue team, to find out the extent of the damage. They gave me the all clear, so I carried on racing and we managed to win the heat.
Well, now we're looking at a boat driven by Will Taylor, Country Clubs Hotel, the red boat there, which is a Barracuda and an ex-boat of yours, in fact, that you drove on this circuit the year before. How do you compare between a wooden boat like the Barracuda and this, the very latest boat at the time, the Elite?
Well, the two boats are very, very different. It would be wrong to say that particular boat and just classify it as another wooden boat. That, in fact, is a marathon boat. And, in fact, the job that Will's doing there with it is a tremendous job because, as I say, it is a marathon boat. We're racing on a sprint circuit. You do need a sprint circuit, and this is an out-and-out sprint boat, the carbon fibre. They're very, very different to drive. The carbon fibre is very light and very responsive and very, very unforgiving.
Tony, the first lap of the second heat, we knew this one was going to be a bit of a run, but it really was very close between you and Steve, with a terrific bang as you came round the first turn. What happened there?
Well, I was a boat length in front and he ran in the back of me. And the front of his boat's damaged and the back of mine.
So he literally hit your right sponsor
and
and
in the back of me. I mean, it's simple as that.
as some people would say, it's what racing's all about.
Sure, but you know, if the guy wants to live, he's going to have to not try and drive as dangerously, or he won't.
Tony Williams giving a pretty clear view of his opinion of Steve Curtin's driving. Curtin's craft seriously damaged, requiring an entirely different sort of repair on the carbon fibre hull to that which will take place when Tony Williams has to look at what the damage is on his, that of course being of the normal plywood construction. Mark Wilson, meanwhile, has had his electrical problems attended to. And while the drilling and patching goes on Curtin's boat, it's a new prop on Wilson's roller truck craft, now being tested in the water.
But that was as far as Mark Wilson got. The start pontoon, and you can see on the far right there, Wilson crawling off the jetty. It was to be a disastrous day for the roller truck sponsored driver.
Curtin, once again, in command. In spite of the patch on the boat, he was determined that a craft which has not perhaps had the best of success record in international racing was going to give him his first win in the British Championship in 1985.
Tony, of course, had not been able to repair his boat in time and so didn't feature in the third heat. Back came Mark Wilson.
Out on the water, everyone was watching Will Taylor. Clearly, a boat that's built for marathons in a sprint race is a handful. But this was a remarkable performance on the part of somebody who could well be a force to be reckoned with.
As we all stood up on the bank in Carmill, we said to one another, Will Taylor is someone to watch in the future.
Bill Ormiston, by now, had come perhaps to terms with what was some difficult water conditions and also some incidents that were happening around him. But once again, Curtin ran out the winner.
How do you feel?
Very, very pleased. I mean, you know what sort of the start of the season's been like for me. Pretty strenuous to say the least. Our last victory was June at Chasewater, the Roller Truck Championship round. It's been a long time. I mean, June seems like an eternity ago, it really does. To come here and go home with half a boat and the first round, I'm ecstatic, I really am.
Well, that was the first round of the British Championship out of the way. And, the pleasure on Steve Curtin's face was not misplaced, because don't forget, he'd already raced 3 times during the course of 1985 by the time the British Championship started. 2 of them, you couldn't call them racing, really. The first time in Nassau, he arrived to find that his boat had arrived in several pieces behind him. Then moved on to Miami for the second round of the World Championship, and the tail end of his left-hand sponson fell out and caused him to turn over in one of the heats there, so that was him out of the racing then. And so it was only when Steve finally got to South Africa that things changed, and so his pleasure in that win was not misplaced. But Steve, this is, to the spectator, perhaps a time when you all appear to just be trolling around in the water, having a bit of fun before the race starts, but it's not the case at all, is it?
Not at all. This is actually winning a race. We're setting a boat up for a win. This time is most important to us. We check the engine heights, the different propellers, and so many different settings on the boat, which are crucial to us actually in the race.
Well, Stuart B in Bedfordshire in the second round, it was June the 2nd as well, and glorious weather. But for Mark Wilson, definite handling problems here, I think.
Yeah, you can see Mark was standing on the front of his boat there talking to one of his crew, and he was actually saying that his boat's not handling as he feels it should do in these conditions. He knows the circuit, he does a lot of testing here, and you can see here that he's actually altering the height of the engine. He's actually probably raising the engine up there, it looks like, and by doing so he's actually lifting the propeller higher out of the water, which will give a greater top-end speed.
And how much adjustment have you actually got from top to bottom on that rack? I mean, are we talking about a total of 1 inch or a total of 3 inches?
Well, I think we're about 1 inch.
About 1 inch. So it's very, very fine, the kind of adjustment you can do there.
Yeah, on my boat, we normally work in sort of 1/16 of an inch at a time, and that does actually make a difference.
Now, there are other adjustments you can make on these boats as well, aren't there, Steve? You can run front wing, you can put a weight in the nose. What decisions do you take as to what to use?
Well, it really depends on the conditions. You can see Mark just pulling his boat out just to the left there, that he's actually going to fit a wing to the boat. Now, if you're taking the engine up, the back end will skate, and fun enough, by putting a wing on the front end as an aerofoil, you can actually balance the boat. So it's very crucial.
But presumably windy conditions can change your method of thinking totally.
That's right. With a wing, you can actually put more angle on the wing to control the front end and not necessarily have to lower the engine.
Now, fuel, the drivers and the teams are fueling up here. How critical is it to keep an eye on your fuel?
Obviously, very critical. Weight's a major problem with the boats. The boats are very light, and obviously you've got your 2-stroke oil to mix in there as well. And obviously you don't want to run out of fuel, so we run to the bare minimum with just a drop more.
And the quality?
Aviation fuel. So it's quite a high octane. It's the highest we can get in this country.
Steve Curtin giving a concise description of the pressures which exist on a driver prior to a race. Getting the fuel right, getting the aerodynamics right, and getting the prop right. And here's a man who got it wrong. Bill Ormiston collided with Tony Williams, who has damage and wishes to be taken out of the water. Meanwhile, Ormiston comes back, waves to his crew, and tells us what happened.
Well, possibly a little over-enthusiasm on my part. I had Tony Williams, who of course is a very, very experienced driver, nibbling away at my tail for the entire race. And with 2 laps to go, I possibly just got a little overexcited, just went in a bit too fast, and barrel rolled the whole thing.
Well, the front sponson torn off halfway down, but damage also to Tony Williams's craft, which requires a lot of help to get it ready. And Bob Nelson, who builds barracuda hulls, works hard here on a Burgess. The repair, however, is magic, and the boat is ready for the start of the next heat.
So as they left the pontoon for Heat 2, that familiar sound, the pumps first, then the roar of the engines as the Mercury 2 litres powered the remaining boats around the circuit. Tony Williams was out in front, despite that repaired pickle fork. Williams is the 1982 2-litre world champion, before Fonda became the overall umbrella organisation to control 2-litre world championship racing. In 1982, he suffered a terrible accident when attempting a world water speed record, doing severe damage to his left arm. A number of operations and constant physiotherapy have been applied in a desperate attempt for this driver to regain as much control as possible over his arm.
Runs out the winner, ahead of Mark Wilson, who chases him right the way to the flag. It's here, however, that things get complicated. As Wilson explained, there's a lap penalty to contend with too.
Mark Wilson, after 2 heats, you finished second in both, but in fact, on a technicality, you may have won the first one.
That's correct, yeah. The technicality is that Tony Williams hit a buoy in the first heat, which penalises you a lap, which will put him in 3rd place. So it's all on the last heat.
A brief look at Jim Peveril's Barracuda lookalike. This home-built craft should perhaps have had a little more success here, bearing in mind the absence of Steve Curtin. But nevertheless, he didn't. At the start, he was the man who was left. Away they went, and once again it was Tony Williams with it all to do. He'd got to win this heat, but he'd also got to see Mark Wilson fall a great deal further behind than second if he was to take this round.
Williams' determination was really plainly obvious for all to see. At this point in time, he was lying 3rd in the British Championship after Carmill. And so, having been docked a lap in the first heat, he really had to go out and fight for every inch that he could hold over the rest of the pack that followed along behind him. And he really went out to prove a point.
Williams's hull is a comparatively old one. Careful preparation, however, together with a fine engine man, seemingly has produced a winning combination. Can he keep it up?
Well, Peveril got his engine started and went out to join the rest of the pack. And the afternoon sun, a beautiful situation for everyone to come and enjoy this racing, came out and stayed out all day down there in the middle of Bedfordshire. And here we got a rare opportunity to look straight down the tunnel of one of these boats and see the attitude that they take as they come head on towards you on the water.
The aerodynamic exercise of building craft such as these, of course, comes into its own, not just in a straight line, but when overtaking other craft. Wilson here, the boat set low in the water, not high on the plane at all, as he brings it down to go round the turnbuoy.
Yes, a breezy day despite the sunshine, and a choice for the drivers as to whether to run with a front wing or without, and whether to place weight in the nose or without, as we've heard Steve Curtin discuss before. Neil Hall, out for the first time running in the British Championship, was having problems holding his right hand in the air to indicate to all the other drivers that he was running slowly and probably about to stop. Down towards us came Will Taylor, and down towards us came the rest of the pack, fighting their way through the glinting spray in that lovely afternoon sun.
The absence of Steve Curtin, who by now had decided that the carbon fibre boat was not really the machine to use, meant that everybody else was in for a big chance in a change in the championship situation. Above all people, it favoured Will Taylor, who had got extremely well in the first round of the championship at Carmill and was going well here. By the end, therefore, of this second round in the championship at Stewartby, it was Will Taylor in the lead with 10 points. And in a joint second place, Steve Curtin, absent of course, Mark Wilson, who hadn't started in the first one, and Tony Williams, who had, but had had problems.
Mark Wilson, congratulations, another fine win for Roller Truck. How was it?
It was super. Everything went to plan. The boat ran well. I'm very pleased. We set it up for Bristol, and it seems okay. No problems.
Almost 4 weeks later, on the 7th of July, we all turned up at Chasewater, just north of Birmingham, a circuit which has now become well known for powerboat racing and used many times for testing. The main protagonists were there, Roller Truck with Mark Wilson, the Black Anglo boat with Tony Williams. And as the hundreds of people gathered around the shoreline to watch what was going to be a tremendous spectacle because the championship was really hotting up, the main sponsors, Roller Truck, Langholm, Century Oils, And all their guests looked up in the air and watched the Marlborough aerobatic team, the pit specials, fly overhead and put on a superb display of skill up there in the skies. And while they watched that, Mark Wilson stood on the back of his trailer with his stopwatch and watched something else in complete disbelief. Steve Curtin in his new Burgess.
Steve, how is the new boat?
Terrific, really nice. It responds well, it's fast. I've never seen revs like it. I mean, amazing, amazing.
From Tony Williams' face, it looks as if Steve Curtin's confidence has already got to him. Williams, lying joint second in the championship, must be feeling that perhaps the Anglo craft now could do with a little bit more development. Perhaps a new hull? Steve smooths down his hair in anticipation of a battle to come. There's one consolation, however, for everybody else. It's obviously been a pretty rushed job. The paintwork is not complete. Just how much testing has he done? That remains to be seen as to whether or not, therefore, he can run reliably in the race.
Ever calm and ever watchful, Bill Ormiston stands and watches his crew prepare the engine, and this is Will Taylor changing props. Props, of course, extremely important. Without exactly the right one, you are just not going to win any race at all. But a beautifully prepared boat, and I think of any driver in the National Championship, Will Taylor has to be commended for superb presentation.
So it's into the water then. Jim Peverell back again, hoping that here perhaps some of the ill luck that in fact blighted his performance in the second round of the championship may very well be at an end. Will Taylor, can he maintain that lead at the head of the field here? And Tony Williams, 2 accidents, 2 races. Is there to be a third, or will this be a Williams victory? Heat 1, Eric Michel.
And amazingly, with a brand new boat, Curtin is left on the start pontoon as Williams blasts his way away down the course with the rest of the boats following behind his rooster tail. Curtin sits in disbelief on the pontoon, his crew frantically working on the back of the boat, trying to find the fault with the engine. A new boat, but what has happened to the engine?
Well, eventually, after a delayed start, Curtin is into the race. But by now, the rest of the field are literally miles ahead. Here at Chasewater, the one place that I suppose anyone has heard of when it comes to powerboating, it's the one man who perhaps has had the ill luck in the early 2 races who is making the pace now. He's well away from the opposition, and Curtin can hope perhaps to pick up a few places as this heat goes on and do better in the second and third. Judging by his performance, it's possible.
Missing from the pontoon, once again problems for Mark Wilson. His team also worked frantically to get him back out on the water, and eventually he did appear. Peverell floated round the turns. The similarity between this boat and Will Taylor's Barracuda could not be missed. And somehow Peverell was just never able to get that boat really into a competitive state.
For Curtin now, it was a question of pressuring as hard as he could and finding out just what development work could be done between now and the next heat. For Tony Williams, it was a question of holding on to that lead and knowing that probably by the time it came to that second heat, there'd be pressure from Curtin.
Curtin, of course, equal pegging with Williams at this stage in the Roller Truck National Series, had to fight through the back markers to try and catch up with Williams, and neck with a boat, of course, that he used to run, and passed it eventually, and then past Jim Peverell, and round the course they went.
The latest Burgess, the Barracuda, and of course the Barracuda lookalike in line-ahead formation. In second place, there was no doubt that Bill Ormiston had settled down, unworried about the fact that Curtin was catching him only on the water. Into the contest came Mark Wilson. Unfortunately, it was not for long. The boat just wasn't going well, and as far as this first heat was concerned, it was really a write-off. And so, into the final stages of the race, and Tony Williams where he wanted to be, at the head of the field, scoring points and letting everybody else now wonder about what was going to happen in Heat 2 and Heat 3. The Anglo craft goes through to victory in Heat 1, and Williams the man who does the job once again.
So Heat 1 it was to Williams, 6.3 seconds ahead of Ormiston, and back into the pits went a very, very unhappy Mark Wilson.
But if Wilson was unhappy, Tony Williams must have been ecstatic. At last, things had gone right, he'd survived one heat without any damage to the craft. Ormiston happy. His craft, of course, damaged in the previous race, you'll recall, now fully repaired and going well. Out of the water they come, that's Jim Peverell. And now it's checkover time. And for some people, that's going to be more heartrending than others. Among those who has a problem, of course, has been Mark Wilson.
Steve West, the high-performance engineer from Mercury, checking over Mark Wilson's engine with all the facilities available to him. Just what is the problem that's been dogging Mark so far this series? Bill Ormiston's boat is refueled, not too much, not too little. No more weight needed than absolutely necessary, and fine adjustments to the front wing of Will Taylor's boat.
So, Will Taylor then, looking perhaps to increase a little bit of downforce at the front. A fine view of Steve Curtin's new craft. Was that an electrical problem that slowed him at the start of the first heat? Time alone remains to see whether or not the treatment to all these craft works out as we come up to the start of Heat 2. And what a heat this turned out to be.
One of the marvellous things at Chasewater is the slipways getting the boats in and out of the water quickly instead of having to rely on cranes. And all the boats formed up down on the start pontoon. Mark Wilson quite rightly looked over his right shoulder back down at the engine, wondering if it was going to start this time. The same thought must have been in Steve Curtin's mind.
Just listen out for the fuel pump sound. And they're away. And a tremendous start this time by the whole field as they go racing down towards that far buoy. Williams has made a good start, so has Curtin. But who's going to come out in the lead when they come round that far buoy?
Curtin obviously used the first heat to test this boat for the first time, and now he's found the mettle of it. But look, out in front, it's Mark Wilson. He's found the problem. He's ahead of Williams, he's ahead of Curtin, and he's ahead of Ormiston. It's Wilson holding the lead in this second heat.
So Mark Wilson, with the roller truck entered craft, leading the roller truck Grand Prix. Chasewater proving, perhaps, that this is really a chance for Wilson to claw back some very valuable points. Remember, he lay in second place in the championship when he came here.
Simon Jewson running with the American Pleasurewood theme park. But there was a big battle on. This was the battle. Williams on the right in the black boat. Curtin on the left in the new yellow Burgess, and right alongside the rooster of Williams's boat.
The change in styles here between these two drivers, Williams, remember, wary of Curtin's behaviour, made an interesting comparison. Always a tight line man, Williams was trying all the time to force Curtin to go round the outside of him. And at first the ploy worked well. Eventually, however, like some racing drivers who outbrake themselves, in this particular case, it was a question of outturning himself. Williams came in too close, Curtin got through, and once by, got away, leaving him behind by some half a mile or so.
This was an indication of things to come from Curtin. We last saw him really perform superbly well back in 1983, and now all of a sudden, having gone through all the development work on the carbon fibre boat, here was Curtin in a brand new wooden Burgess right out there and chasing Wilson for that first place.
But if you're in the lead of a race, you can drive that race at the pace of the opposition. And that's precisely what Mark Wilson proceeded to do. No longer did he feel threatened by anyone. He controlled the race from the front and easily came home the winner by over 6 seconds from Steve Curtin in second place. A long way behind was Williams. Would that be enough when they came to Heat 3? Would that be enough, bearing in mind there was trouble over precisely what happened at the end of Heat 1? In came the drivers, and it was noticeable as they did so that there was something of an atmosphere. Williams was looking depressed, miserable, and very serious. Total contrast to what was going on just a few yards away, as the victorious Wilson stood astride the boat as it was pulled in. Both he and Steve Curtin were delirious with joy. They'd thoroughly enjoyed the race, and they were very happy. They, obviously, were the source of the problem as far as Williams was concerned. Arm in arm, they went up, and we went down into the paddock to find Mark Wilson and see what had happened.
This is the third round where we've had protests and aggravation in 3 rounds. A similar situation, I think, to the very first one.
Yeah, it seems to be. It's obviously on position. Placings on the first heat that the protest's over, but it's such a hotly fought for championship is this championship that everybody's dragging the rule books out and just trying everything in the book to get the points and get the money and towards the championship. But I think it's over with Steve Curtin and Tony Williams on the positioning, and I think basically it'll be down to the actual timekeepers to go back through their books and the time chart and then check what it is.
It's now 6 o'clock at Chasewater. We still don't have a decision on exactly who's won today's Formula 2 race. Behind me, Tony Williams has just posted the 4th protest of the day, and the outcome is still to be announced.
The result of Heat 3 was Wilson, Curtin and Williams. And eventually we did get a result for Heat 1. Williams kept his victory, as a result winning here. In spite of all the discussion, the rulebook won the day if Wilson was the moral victor.
We're off to Windermere, which isn't ideal for the boat, purely because Windermere is such a big lake. It's always a little bit lumpy. There are a lot of rollers about, and it's such a small boat.
And so the teams moved up to the Lake District. July the 13th, and Mark Wilson shows the rest of the drivers just how large the rollers are that he can see at the far end of the course. In came Bill Ormiston, having been out to practice. This was the halfway stage in the championship. The points looked like this: Tony Williams with 18, Mark Wilson with 15, Steve Curtin with 13, Will Taylor here in the picture now with 12 points, then Bill Ormiston with 7, Jim Peveril with 4 and Neil Hall with 2.
Here at Windermere, the mist threatens to roll down the mountains as away they go at the start and charge down towards that turnboy. Who is going to make it there first? Will once again it be a question of Wilson? Will perhaps Steve Curtin do it? Or will it be Tony Williams? And Williams it is, charging ahead of the rest of the field there, putting the pressure on from the word go as they go round the turnboy there and race back. In second place, Curtin, and in third place there, side by side, Jim Peveril with his new engine now, racing and pressuring the roller track craft of Mark Wilson.
Peveril put on a superb display. An EFI box, electronic fuel injection, had been applied to his engine, and all of a sudden he was finding World Championship status. As every lap went by, the boats came round the bottom turn, and as every lap went by, the drivers looked more and more weary. Down at the far end of the course, there were heavy rollers, taking it out of the boats and taking it out of the drivers every time they went round. The crews stood on the shoreline and pointed.
Rollers, of course, caused by the steamers, and rollers, of course, causing the bottom to be ripped out of Williams's boat. In he comes, an early retirement from the situation, and you can see the damage there, as water is where it should not be.
So that left Curtin flying high above the water as he made his way up and down the course. Halfway through the championship, and Curtin has to prove his point. He must win here at Windermere to take a dominating position in the championship.
Ormiston comes through. Curtin builds up an 18-second lead. We talked to him about the conditions.
Now, you talk about the rollers here. If we take a course like Bristol, which can be very, very choppy, very rough, and yet drivers will go out and race on that, albeit not very happily, but they will go and race, and we get some very sharp racing. And yet here we've got rollers, and drivers are very worried about it. What difference is there in the conditions that should give you so much concern?
Well, basically everyone goes into Bristol and they know it's going to be like that pretty well all around the course, apart from going up past the SS Great Britain, going up the circuit. With here, you can be coming down the straight in pretty well flat, calm conditions, and literally you might see it 20 yards ahead, but at 130 miles an hour, there's nothing you can do about it. You'll just see these rollers, and you'll hit them. Now, in the first heat, you saw Tony Williams rip the bottom out of his. In fact, the roller he hit, I hit the same one. I actually came out of my cockpit virtually. My backside was actually as high as the cockpit was. So, you know, you can't do anything about it. You can't back off. If you back off and catch it with the back end, you'll just hit the back end and nosedive. You've got to be so careful. You know, but if you're racing with someone, they're not going to back off, and I'm not going to back off. So it's really sort of being a little bit careful, but, you know, you're there to win.
And Curtin was there to win. He won that 15-lap heat by some 20 seconds or so, with Wilson in second place, Taylor in third, Peveril with that new engine in fourth place, Simon Jewson fifth, and the American Team Park in fifth position. Now was the time to check the damage, and it was fairly obvious that the badly damaged Anglo-Dupes Colour Group boat was now out of the running for the rest of the day. Williams had had little option but to drive it straight on the beach. Meanwhile, Curtin here is still excited about hitting that roller. He describes the whole thing in graphic detail. The roller track craft is craned out of the water. Wilson, of course, finished second. He'll be anxious to look at his aerodynamics and see what improvements can be made. Bill Ormiston bites his nails as his stricken craft is towed in. The mist rolls down the mountains. Conditions deteriorate as we talk to a new and rising star.
Robin Stoddard, we're here at Windermere for the Grand Prix this weekend, and you've managed to get enough points this year to make you the Formula 4 British champion. You must be very ambitious. What's on for you next?
Obviously, I'm looking to Formula 2 now. At the end of the day, it's all about sponsorship and money, but I'd like to attend the Fonda World Series if it's at all possible.
Robin, you've just become the Formula 4 national champion. We've been talking, in fact, about your ambitions for the future and to race in the Fonda World Grand Prix Series. And we have with us Steve Curtin, who is not only the current Fonda British champion, but also races in the World Series. Now, Steve, Robin's been talking about his ambitions. He obviously has no conception at the moment of the kind of things that he's going to be confronted with when he's out there racing in a World Series. What kind of advice could a driver of your experience give to him?
Well, Robin's very capable. He's proved that. He's won the championship. The sort of advice I'd give him if he's coming to Fonda is just not to be in too much of a hurry. Go there, learn, get in your Grand Prix rig. It's a lot faster and you get a lot less chance to put things right should things go wrong. Just take your time and come in gently. When you get bunched up with the crowd, you know, really in the pack going into the first turn, your entry, instead of being 65, 70 miles an hour, is something close on 130. So you could imagine the problems that throws in with it. So, you know, it's really sort of slowly. He'll get there.
Out of interest, why not Formula 3 as the next step?
It's a good question. Earlier on in the year, or earlier on in the season, we considered going Formula 3. We've spoken to various people involved with Fonda and basically Formula 2 racing, and we think that we can race Formula 2 for the same sort of money as Formula 3. So hopefully that's the way we will go.
Well, Robin, Steve, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
By heat 3, the conditions had deteriorated even further. There was rain, there was mist, as away they went. Wilson was determined to try and get away in this heat as he had in heat 2. It was then, after 3 laps, he had to relinquish his lead when the gearbox packed up.
7 boats had left that start pontoon. Williams was left in the pits. The bottom of his boat was beyond the abilities of any local boat builder. Wilson fought his way back down the course, Curtin dogging his every move as they disappeared into the mist across Lowood Bay. And back down towards us once more, neck and neck, a real match race developing. Was Curtin going to win this heat as well?
Curtin's determination was obvious, but already we had seen that from time to time he could effectively be too determined. In close company, in bad water, there was obviously a problem that could prevail at any moment. This was dicing right on the ragged edge, and Wilson at the moment held the advantage.
Down they came towards us again, and down came the rain, which drove roller trucks and everybody else's guests inside the roller truck marquee. And this battle brought them all out again. They couldn't believe the tremendous match race that was going on to decide who was going to win the heat. And as they came round the buoy for one last time, it was virtually a thickness of paint that separated them as they went past the checkered flag.
But Curtin was the winner. Taylor in second place and Wilson in third place at Windermere meant that the overall situation sees Curtin at this stage of the season with 22 points. Wilson next up with 19, and then Tony Williams and Will Taylor with 18 apiece. Ormiston and everybody else well down the list. An amazing victory here for a man who certainly at the start of the season had a craft that we thought couldn't win anything. That change to the new Burgess hull has made all the difference.
Steve Curtin, round 4 of the Roller Truck British Championship. Another victory for you, but a very wet one today.
Isn't it just? Yeah, actually, it was okay. It's nice.
Bit of a battle there out with Mark in the last race, but in the second heat, Mark had big problems when it looked perhaps as if he was going to keep ahead of you.
Yeah, Mark was in front on that heat. I think we probably could have just beaten him in that heat. His skeg came off and hit his prop, which slowed him right down. I'm not sure how many points he picked up, but it put him pretty well out the running. But the last heat, I don't know what he's done, but I mean, it was neck and neck and neck. I just had him going towards the end of the straight. Of course, he turned tight and I was on the outside and it just went on. I think that's probably the closest we've come to having a photo finish in boat racing. But it was great fun, great fun.
Steve, congratulations, a magnificent win, the Windermere Grand Prix. What about the rest of the British Championship now?
It's mine.
It's yours. You feel without question. There are 2 more rounds to go.
Fairford's going to be iffy, but home pier point's mine. Fairford, first or second. It's going to be first.
So 3 on the trot, 3 British Championships.
That's what we're aiming for.
Congratulations, Steve.
Thanks very much.
A confident Steve Curtin leaves a miserable Windermere for the next round of the championship at Fairford. Will his confidence be misplaced? Will the weather be any better? Fairford will provide the opportunity of the answer to that question. And here, certainly as far as the weather's concerned, there isn't a great deal of improvement. Can Williams, however, get some points back in the championship, which stands like this?
Curtin with 22, Mark Wilson with 19 and just 1 point behind. Williams with 18, partnered alongside with Will Taylor with 18 points as well. But the weather conditions were very, very different. Instead of rain, we had wind.
Mark Wilson must have felt that perhaps this might be his opportunity too to redress the balance a little. Second in the championship and obviously anxious for a win. Williams looks tense right at the start. Wilson takes the roller track craft down into position.
This was August, and as the 2-litre Mercury engines made their way out onto the course, Curtin had problems. His engine wouldn't fire. Close words with Steve West didn't seem to solve the problem, and he had to leave the start pontoon late. On the back of each of these boats is a V6 2-litre Mercury engine, developing tremendous power, giving these boats acceleration figures which would equal that of a Formula One Grand Prix car.
A huge howl of engines, and Mark Wilson's early lead results in nothing as far as he's concerned. It's Ormiston who comes through first and who talks to us about his first win.
Bill, that was a tremendously successful day for you and the Century Oils team that particular Saturday, winning, of course, your first heat of the season, and everybody hoped maybe your first Grand Prix of the season. But it didn't work out that way, and the weather conditions changed. Did you make any adjustments to the boat?
The following day, the weather did deteriorate quite a lot, and we made adjustments to the wing, but that was our only and main adjustment.
Why did you decide to run with the wing and perhaps not take it off given the windy conditions and put some extra weight in the nose?
The boat is essentially designed to run with a wing in this case. We make our adjustment from there. I try to avoid weight if I can.
Bill, looking back on that day, would you have done anything different in hindsight?
No, we would have raced and simply things would have turned out as they did.
Now, the weather conditions had changed to such an extent that a young British driver, Mark Rolls, in a Formula 4 catamaran went out, and he rolled on the side of the circuit and ran up the bank, fell out of his boat and collapsed on the side of the circuit. Very dramatic. In fact, he was extremely lucky to survive that accident, I think. Did you take that as a very serious indication of things to come?
Well, we were all aware of where he flipped. That was where the trouble would come. The wind was coming down over the top of the trees there with quite a lot of uplift.
Do you, as drivers, talk to each other before an event like this, when things are tricky, to decide what exactly you're going to do, or do you stick it out on your own?
Essentially, powerboat people are firstly boating people and secondly racing people, unlike motorcars, for example. And we share information, we warn each other if we find a gust in a certain part of the course. We do talk to each other.
Will Taylor here is having trouble with his trim buttons. Can you just explain to me exactly how those work?
Essentially, they're rocker switches. In the direction of the red, they lift the front, which enables the boat to go faster and pick up quickly out of the corners. When danger threatens or you're going into a corner, you might well trim it in to get the boat back onto the water to retain your steering.
So that is your ultimate control for speed and performance?
The main control, you could say, are the trim buttons. That's where the sensitivity and experience comes in.
Well, this is the start of Heat 2 at Fairford, and things really did change for Bill Ormiston here. In the centre of the pack, as they left and went up to the turnbuoy, Steve Curtin took the lead in the bright yellow Lang Holmes boat. But Bill, looking back on that day now, things were to turn out to be quite remarkable in what happened. How do you actually remember this particular event?
Well, I'm quite dispassionate about it, really. I remember the incident completely. My boat started to lift. I thought for some time I could get it down again. Then I realised that when I heard the propeller leave the water and the revs run away with themselves, I realised I wasn't going to get it down again. At that point, I was more concerned with survival, so I tucked my elbows in and drew in my legs with the idea of flipping out at the top of the loop. In the event, the boat corkscrewed at the top of the loop, and the inertial forces held me into the cockpit. Consequently, I was sitting in the boat when it landed.
Now, you just got past Will Taylor and presumably were hungry for Tony Williams up in front there. Do you think that extra push just took you?
If I'd settled down then and decided to stay there, I would probably have kept I would have kept the boat in one piece. It was the pushing for the extra position that made the difference.
Were you in pain as they dragged you onto the Osprey rescue boat here?
Yes. I was aware that the damage was fairly serious.
It looks really horrific as you get hurled out of the boat there, and almost as if the bounce across the water probably saved you from bursting through the surface and maybe doing a lot more damage to yourself than really happened. As you're lying in the water there, can you remember what you were thinking?
From the impact, I must say I was surprised to be there, and again I was aware that there was damage to me, and as you see the poor old boat there, which I was particularly fond of.
It's been rebuilt?
It has been rebuilt completely. Wonderful job, and she'll be raced again.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. That's a really interesting look back to a day that saw a quite extraordinary series of events. And so, as the Century Oils team worked to clean up what was left of Bill's boat, the crowd milled around and waited for the restart of Heat 2.
By the time the restart came about, conditions had deteriorated even further. Some drivers did not come to the start. In fact, only 4 drivers went away from the pontoon. And straight away, it was Steve Curtin defying the elements and going into an immediate lead from Tony Williams in second place, Will Taylor third, and Neil Hall fourth. None of the drivers liked racing in a situation like this, but it was a magnificent opportunity for Curtin to show the tremendous control that he can exert. Williams, the older man, perhaps the wiser man in many ways, was determined to stay in the hunt, but didn't want to know about the battle for a lead this time.
His memory was only too clear of 1983 when Peter Inwood was so tragically killed on this circuit, a very unusual circuit with islands in the middle. Phil Duggan, the same race, had difficult times, and eventually he too suffered an accident. Still not to return effectively to racing.
And so with Williams, Curtin, Taylor or Wilson able to take the championship, we talk to Williams.
Tony Williams, here we are at Fairford in Gloucestershire, round 5 of the Roller Truck British National Championship, and you've won. What thoughts were going through your mind today racing in these awful weather conditions?
Well, I think it was just a question of keeping the boat on the water and finishing the race rather than necessarily mixing with other drivers. Obviously it leaves the final round of the British Championships wide open because I'm now 1 point behind Steve Curtin, who's now leading still. So it's going to make it very close.
Meanwhile, how did Steve Curtin feel about his chances in the championship now?
You were pipped at the post by Tony Williams, basically because of the 2-heat instead of 3-heat race. How will this affect you at home Pierpoint in September?
Well, not at all. Not at all. We'll still beat him.
But he didn't. A blown engine on the final lap of the first heat removed Curtin's chances of retaining his title for a record 3 times in a row. At the last moment, the championship snatched from his grasp.
Steve Curtin, here we are in home Pierpoint for the last round of the National Championships in 1985, and something went drastically wrong for you in the first heat. Tell me about it.
Not a lot to say really apart from that. That's the head. We ran very strong in the first heat. We ran testing very strong, and all we had to do was really sort of finish in front of Tony and get 2 points more than whatever Tony got today. We didn't. The first heat was run, as I say, very strong. We were in second place in front of behind John Hill, that's where we need to be for the rest of the day. This let go, and we weren't there. So it's a very sad day for me.
To a spectator, powerboat racing and powered sports are the good times, the winning, the champagne, the success. They don't often see a situation where the disappointment of a driver is more than openly displayed on his face. Steve, looking back now, you had the 83 British Championship, the 84 British Championship. You fought all the way through the year against Tony Williams in a desperate bid to get 3 British Championships on the trot. But it didn't work, did it?
No, it didn't, and that really was the saddest day of my racing career. And looking back today, I'm still very, very sad. But you know, it's one of those things. I was taught from a very early age that you've got to accept defeat as gracefully as you sort of accept winning. So we lost, so you know we'll try again.
But everybody here had to accept defeat at the hands of one man. The newly crowned world champion John Hill was here. He had come to win. In the first heat, he'd proved his point, winning from Wilson. Straight into the lead at the commencement of the second heat, he set out to do it all over again.
Wilson had arrived at Chasewater with his new Burgess, which he'd recently had the first opportunity to run in at the London Grand Prix. But out in front of him, in an equally matching boat, Hill kept the lead away from Wilson. This is Hill's home testing ground. If he knows any course in the world, he knows this back to front. I should think he could do this in his sleep. So he proved his point, stayed out in front with Wilson dogging his moves and Williams desperately fighting around, knowing that all he needed to do was to just keep going.
A gap of 2.8 seconds opened up between first and second. Williams, struggling hard, held on to third place. But somehow or other, things were not going as well as they might do for the second-place driver. In the lead, Hill safely was extending his lead and appeared to be comfortable. But almost in the identical place that Curtin had had his problems in the previous heat, Wilson was out of the race. Williams finished second, Taylor finished third, and that changed the situation yet again. Now, with a chance for the championship, Tony Williams was on a winning course. There was but one man who could beat him. Curtin and Wilson, as far as they were concerned, were out of the running. Hill could very well win, but what would Will Taylor do? If Taylor was to stay in contention and Williams was to fall out in this final heat, the championship could go to the newcomer.
And so in this third and final heat of the final round of the 1985 Roller Truck British Grand Prix Series, a mere 4 boats on the pontoon. John Hill in the Beefeater Burgess, Tony Williams in the black Anglo Duke's colour Burgess, Will Taylor in the red Country Club's Barracuda, and Neil Hall in his black Hodges.
And this time, it wasn't quite such an easy victory for the world champion. Hill had to contend with a challenge all the way through. Hall was pressing him. A newcomer to the series, a man who's not figured really in the results, was really giving the world champion a hard time.
Tony Williams had to finish this race. Right behind him was Will Taylor. And if Williams didn't finish the race, Will Taylor, after all that, was going to take the Roller Truck British Grand Prix. So everybody had to stand out and watch what was going to happen during the course of this last heat of the last race.
As far as Hall was concerned, it was a challenge that was not to last the day long. It was a challenge, however, that was well worthwhile watching. The newcomer went out in front and led the world champion and led Williams. The three of them diced for lap after lap until up went the hand of Hall and he retired from the fray. Now Williams was in charge. Could he stay there? Uncharacteristically, he went wide. Hill was looking for a way through on the inside, but it was not to be this lap. As Hall struggled to see what the problem was, Williams came through on the inside once again of the world champion. Williams, however, now had to consider the options open. He should hang on, fight it out for the lead. He should ease off and make sure to finish in front of Taylor in third place. That was what was essential if he was to take the championship.
Tony Williams, 1982 world champion and the European champion. Just on the edge of a British championship in his pocket as well, as Will Taylor shadows the black boat round and round the course. Past went John Hill, past the checkered flag, and past, to his enormous relief, went Tony Williams, the new 1985 roller truck British champion.
And so after a series balanced on a knife edge, we talk to the new champion.
Tony Williams, home pier point, last round of the British National Championship, and you've done it with a close run for your money. How do you feel?
Well, it's marvellous. I've never actually won the British Championship in ON, so it's a good feeling against stiff opposition, and it's consistency really that paid off. I mean, I wasn't the fastest today, but other boats were setting their engines up to such a high level of revs that they were onto a bit of a loser. If it was a bit chancy, which I didn't. So really, I played really into the reliability stakes, perhaps a little bit too much today, but obviously it paid off, fortunately.
Well, thanks for talking, Tony, and congratulations on your win this year. Look forward to seeing you next year racing.
Thank you very much.
And so it's goodbye to the Roller Truck Grand Prix Series for 1985. In a few months' time, we move on to 1986. In the meanwhile, it's goodbye from myself, Neville Hay, and my colleague Eric Michel. And a look to the future and the new blood in the championship, the final words from the newly crowned champion.
I think as far as the youngsters are concerned, we really need to try and open up the class on a cost basis, because I don't see how anybody can hope to buy or to find something like $18,000 to buy a competitive boat, an engine. And if these engines now let go, they're very, very expensive. You're talking about probably £4,000. I mean, I've blown a powerhead today. And of course, if you're winning £300, it doesn't really make a dent, in that sort of price. I think we've got to try, maybe we should have the Formula Grand Prix class in the UK should be perhaps with standard engines, with maybe 3 or 4 manufacturers, and the manufacturers will get involved and give engines to drivers, and we'll have fields of 12, 15, 20 boats.